I am recording this because written statements keep changing when I look back at them. Sentences I know I typed appear softer the next time, less certain. Dates slip. Distances stretch. I don't trust paper anymore. I don't trust my own handwriting, but my voice still sounds like mine. For now. This is not an official report. I am no longer allowed to submit those. This is not meant for my supervisors, or the county, or the families who still call my old number by mistake. This is just a record. A personal account. A confession, if that word still means what I think it means. I have led search and rescue operations in the Oregon Cascades for most of my adult life. I know the mountains the way some people know their own homes. I know where sound bends. I know where snow hides crevices until late summer. I know which trails confuse first-time hikers and which ones confuse everyone. I know how people behave when they are lost, dehydrated, hypothermic, afraid. There are patterns. There are rules. One of the rules is that the mountains do not surprise you all at once. They warn you. Weather shifts gradually. Fatigue announces itself. Panic leaves signs. Even death has a sequence you can trace backward, if you've done this long enough. Another rule is simpler. Shadows behave. I have repeated that to myself so many times it no longer feels like language. Shadows behave. They follow, they stretch, they shorten, they break across uneven ground. They do not hesitate. They do not lag. They do not correct themselves. I did not believe in superstition when I started this job. I believed in terrain and weather and human error. I believed in maps and radios and redundancy. I believed that if you documented everything clearly enough, nothing truly disappeared. Not people, not explanations. That belief held for 23 years. The call came in just before evening. Early fall. One of those days that still smells like summer, but ends too quickly. A hiker overdue by a few hours. Solo. Experienced enough to list gear properly when he signed in at the trailhead. No medical red flags. No storm system moving in. The kind of call that rarely turns serious. I have replayed that intake conversation dozens of times. There was nothing unusual in it. The dispatcher's voice, the spelling of the name, the calm assumption that we would find him sitting on a log, embarrassed, battery dead. Those calls usually end with relief and paperwork and jokes about buying the team around. I remember thinking we might be back before dark. We staged near the trailhead as the sun lowered. The Cascades at that hour feel suspended, neither day nor night, a long pause. The forest holds its breath. Radios sound louder. Footsteps feel intrusive. I assign teams the way I always did. Grid patterns. Elevation checks. Nothing improvised. I took the ridgeline with binoculars. I like height. It gives perspective. It makes people smaller, which makes problems manageable. That was when I saw the hiker. He was moving along a narrow cut between trees, not on the main trail but not bushwhacking either. Walking, not stumbling. Upright. Unhurried. I remember noticing that first. Lost hikers usually rush when they hear voices or freeze when they realize they've gone wrong. This man did neither. He walked like someone finishing a thought. I raised the binoculars and centered him. Standard clothing. Neutral colors. Nothing that stood out. His pack sat correctly on his shoulders. He wasn't favoring a leg. I remember feeling a brief, irrational irritation at how normal he looked. Then, my eyes dropped slightly, and I saw the shadow. At first I assumed the angle was confusing me. The sun was low, and the terrain uneven. Shadows do strange things on slopes. I adjusted my stance. Shifted the focus wheel. Took a breath. The shadow did not match his stride. It lagged behind him by a fraction, like a delayed echo. When his right foot stepped forward, the shadow followed late, as if deciding whether it should. When he slowed, The shadow overshot him, stretching too far, then pulling back. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes. Fatigue. Long week. It happens. I lifted them again. Not real. Real, not real. The shadow bent at an angle the light did not justify. It crossed a patch of ground that should have broken it apart. But it stayed whole. For a moment I thought it had an extra limb. That thought felt childish, so I corrected it immediately. Optical illusion. Tree line interference. I scanned the surrounding area for the sun's position, for reflective surfaces, for anything that could explain what I was seeing. Nothing aligned. The hiker continued forward, steady and calm, while the shadow seemed to watch its own movement, adjusting, learning. I did not say anything to the team. That part matters. I want that on record. I did not alert anyone. I did not call it in. I did not log the sighting. I watched, alone, and told myself I would resolve it before involving others. Because that is another rule in this work. You do not contaminate a search with uncertainty. Panic spreads faster than weather. The man stopped briefly, as if sensing something behind him. I held my breath. The shadow stopped a moment later. I remember thinking that if the shadow had stopped first, I would have screamed. That detail stays with me. The relief I felt that it followed him, even badly, instead of leading. He resumed walking, angling downslope, away from the trailhead, deeper into the timber. I tracked him until the trees swallowed both figure and shadow, until there was nothing left but green and dark, and the sound of my own breathing inside my head. I told myself I would reacquire him from another vantage point. I told myself this was what experience felt like. This low hum of unease when you sense a problem before you can name it. I told myself stories are how people fill gaps in perception. Not real. Real. Not real. When I looked back toward the trailhead, the light had shifted more than it should have. The sun was lower, the shadows longer, the forest quieter. Radios crackled below me, voices checking in, still routine, still unbroken. I remember hesitating before answering my own radio. Just a beat too long. Long enough for someone to ask if I was copy. I answered. My voice sounded steady. That frightened me more than if it hadn't. This recording will end if someone finds it. I am leaving it where it can be found, because I am no longer certain what I see when I look at it myself. I need this account outside of me. Untouched. Uncorrected. I am not asking to be believed. I am only stating what I saw, before the rest of it begins to interfere. We moved into the forest in standard formation, and for a while, everything returned to its proper place. Boots on dirt. Radios at regular intervals. Names spoken and answered. The comfort of procedure settled over me like a familiar jacket. I focused on it deliberately. Clip, step, scan, listen, repeat. When you have enough repetitions, they start to feel like truth. The Cascades are good at pretending nothing is wrong. The trees stand where they always have. The trails accept your weight without complaint. Even the silence feels earned, like the quiet of a room after a long meeting finally ends. That evening, the forest gave us nothing overt to argue with. No broken branches, no discarded gear, no calls for help drifting on the air. Still, I noticed what wasn't there. Birds had gone quiet earlier than usual, not abruptly, just gradually enough that you might blame the season if you weren't paying attention. Insects were sparse. The air felt thick, as if sound had to push harder to exist. When one of the newer volunteers whispered a question instead of using the radio, no one corrected him. We split into smaller elements as planned. I took two with me, keeping the ridge advantage. From above, the land folded in on itself, layers of green and shadow overlapping until depth became hard to judge. I checked our bearing more often than necessary. The compass behaved, but I did not trust how easily it did so. I did not tell them about the hiker I had already seen. That omission grew heavier with every step. It sat in my chest like a stone I kept adjusting, trying to find a position where it wouldn't be felt. I told myself I was waiting for confirmation. A better angle. Something solid. That is how we justify delays in this work. We call them caution. As we moved, I kept catching glimpses of motion ahead. Nothing definite. A suggestion of movement where trees closed too quickly. I stopped us twice, for nothing. Each time the explanation came easily. Light shift. Eye fatigue. The others did not challenge me, but their patience had an edge. I could feel it. The first real sign was the trail marker. It was one of ours, nailed to a tree where the map said it should be. Orange, reflective, clean. Except it had been turned slightly, angled away from the path it was meant to guide. Not enough to be obvious, just enough that if you followed it without thinking, you would drift off course over distance. I told myself someone had bumped it. Wind. A bear. I corrected it anyway, hands steady, fingers familiar with the texture of weathered metal. When I stepped back, I realized the shadow of the marker did not align with the tree. I stared at it longer than I should have. The sun was still visible through the canopy. I could see where the light fell. The shadow angled just a degree off, a subtle error, the kind that only stands out if you are already looking for it. When I shifted my position, the shadow corrected itself. Not real. Real. Not real. I did not mention this either. We continued downslope. The forest grew denser, the ground softer, the smell of damp earth stronger. Somewhere below us, water moved, though we hadn't reached the creek yet. The sound felt closer than it should have been, as if distance had compressed. My radio crackled with a status update from another team. Negative contact. Same as us. Same tone. Routine. I responded automatically, but the words felt rehearsed, as though I had said them before in another context. I checked the time. It had advanced, but not by much. That was comforting. Time still worked. Then I saw the hiker again. He was farther downslope than he should have been, given the time between sightings. He moved through a break in the trees, briefly outlined against a lighter patch of ground. Again, upright. Again, unhurried. He did not look injured or lost. He looked like someone who knew exactly where he was going. I raised my hand, signaling my team to stop. They obeyed without question. I brought the binoculars up slowly this time, as if sudden motion might disturb whatever fragile arrangement was holding. The hiker's posture was unchanged. Same pack. Same pace. When he stepped, his footfalls looked deliberate, placed carefully, like someone following a line only he could see. The shadow followed him into the clearing. It was better this time. That was the thought that arrived uninvited. Not worse. Better. Closer to correct. The lag was reduced. The angles less wrong. If I hadn't seen it before, I might have missed the remaining errors entirely. The shadow fell slightly ahead of him now, just enough that when he paused, it seemed to hesitate before settling. When he resumed, it caught up almost immediately, snapping into place like something learning its role. My mouth went dry. I lowered the binoculars and looked at the ground near my own feet. My shadow stretched where it should. I lifted my hand. It followed. Perfect. When I looked back, the hiker had stopped. He stood with his back to us, head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening. I could not see his face, but I felt the certainty that he was aware of being observed. That certainty did not come from any visible cue. It came from somewhere less reliable. The shadow did not stop with him. It took one more step, then corrected itself, sliding back into alignment. One of my team whispered my name. I did not answer. The hiker turned his head just enough that I could see the line of his jaw. He did not look directly at us. His gaze rested somewhere between the trees, unfocused, like someone remembering rather than seeing. The shadow turned first. I felt something cold pass through me. A clean, precise sensation, like a measurement being taken. The shadow's movement was smooth now. Confident, it faced us fully, its outline crisp against the ground. I lowered the binoculars and realized my hands were shaking. We stood there longer than made sense. No one spoke. No radios broke the moment. The forest seemed to lean in, attentive. When the hiker finally moved again, he did not approach us. He stepped off the faint path he had been following and disappeared into thicker timber, the shadow flowing after him without hesitation. I exhaled without remembering when I had stopped breathing. I told my team we would circle around and intercept from below. The words came out clean, professional. They nodded. No one questioned the plan. That trust felt undeserved. As we moved, I became aware of a new discomfort, a sense of asymmetry. The way my pack sat on my shoulders felt wrong, as if it had shifted. I adjusted the straps twice. It did not help. When we crossed a patch of open ground, I glanced down without meaning to. For a fraction of a second, my shadow lagged. It was so slight I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. The next step corrected it. Everything aligned again. I told myself the ground was uneven. I told myself the light was changing. Not real. Real. Not real. I did not look down again. We lost the trail entirely not long after that. Though lost is not the right word. The trail did not vanish. It simply stopped making sense. Switchbacks tightened where the map showed gentle curves. Elevation markers disagreed with how our legs felt. The forest floor dipped and rose in ways that forced us to slow, then stop, then recalibrate. Every correction felt provisional, like we were agreeing to something that could change its mind at any moment. I called in our position. The coordinates sounded wrong as I read them out. Not inaccurate, just unfamiliar, like a word you've spoken too many times in a row. The dispatcher repeated them back without comment. No alarm. No confusion. That should have reassured me. It did not. The light continued to fade, but not evenly. Pockets of brightness clung to the forest floor, as if held there, while other areas sank into premature dusk. Shadows layered over shadows. Depth became unreliable. A fallen log appeared closer than it was, then farther away. When one of my team nearly tripped, he laughed it off too loudly. We found the first piece of evidence shortly after. A boot print in soft earth near the edge of a dry creek bed. Clear tread. Recent. It matched the hiker's reported footwear. I crouched to examine it, relief flickering despite everything. This was something tangible, something that behaved. Then I noticed there was only one. The print was deep, well-defined, the weight distribution correct. But there was no corresponding print beside it. No left-right progression. Just the single impression, as if someone had stepped down and then lifted straight up without transferring weight. I scanned the surrounding ground. Leaves lay undisturbed. Pine needles formed a smooth mat. Unbroken. No scuff marks. No slide. The creek bed showed nothing else. One of my team knelt beside me. He frowned, then smiled uncertainly. Maybe he jumped, he said. Cleared the soft spot, I nodded. I wanted that explanation to be true. I wanted it badly enough that I repeated it back to him, reinforcing it, making it communal. Jumps leave patterns too, but I did not say that. I photographed the print and marked the location, my hands steady again, muscle memory carrying me through the motions. When I stood, my knees protested more than they should have. Fatigue, I told myself. Long day. The mountain always takes its due. We followed the creek bed downslope, calling out at intervals. The sound of our voices felt swallowed quickly, absorbed into the damp air. No echo. No response. The hiker did not call back. That was not unusual. Lost people often conserve energy or hesitate, unsure if the voices are real. I remember thinking how ironic that was. As we moved, I became aware of a subtle change in the rhythm of the forest. Not a sound, exactly. More like a pause between sounds that lasted too long. Footsteps would fall. Then the next would arrive late, as if time itself were briefly distracted. I checked my watch again. It had stopped. I tapped it. The second hand jumped forward, then resumed its movement, ticking a little faster than before. I did not mention this. I reset it, and kept going. Equipment failure happens. You don't panic over a watch. We reached a narrow clearing just as the last of the daylight thinned. The hiker stood at the far end of it, backlit by a pale wash of sky filtering through the trees. He had not been there moments before. I was certain of that. There had been no movement, no sound. He was simply present. I raised my arm to signal a halt. This time, one of my team did not stop immediately. He took an extra step, then froze, confusion flickering across his face as if he had not meant to move at all. The hiker faced away from us. His shoulders were relaxed. His head was level. He looked like someone waiting, though not for us. His shadow stretched toward the tree line, long and narrow, aligned almost perfectly now. Almost. The light source made no sense anymore. The sun should have been lower, the angle steeper. Yet the shadow lay where noon light might have placed it, as if obeying a different sky. I called out the hiker's name. He did not react. I called again, louder. My voice sounded wrong in my ears, flattened, like it had traveled farther than it should have. One of my team repeated the call. Another shifted his weight nervously. The hiker took a step forward. His shadow took two. I felt something in my chest tighten, a slow, deliberate constriction. The shadow's extra step carried it closer to us, its edges sharpening as it crossed into a darker patch of ground. When the hiker stopped again, the shadow did not retreat. It lingered, slightly ahead of him, as if testing the space. I realized then that I could no longer clearly remember what the hiker's face looked like. I knew I had seen him. I could picture clothing, posture, movement. But his features slid away when I tried to focus on them, replaced by a blank impression, a placeholder. That realization unsettled me more than the shadow. Faces anchor people. Without them, everything becomes interchangeable. The forest was silent now in a way that pressed against the ears. Even the creek's distant murmur had faded. I became aware of my own breathing again, shallow and uneven. The hiker turned his head slightly, not enough to reveal his face, just enough to suggest the possibility. The shadow turned fully. I cannot describe what it looked like without lying. It was still a shadow, flat, dark, bound to the ground. And yet, the way it oriented itself felt deliberate, like eye contact without eyes. Not real. Real. Not real. One of my team whispered, "Do you see that?" His voice broke on the last word. I did not answer. If I acknowledged it aloud, it would become harder to manage, harder to contain. I stepped forward instead, closing some of the distance, forcing myself into the role I had inhabited for decades. Leader. Rescuer. The one who approaches. As I moved, the hiker remained still. The shadow adjusted, shifting to maintain its position between us and him. Protective, I thought, and immediately rejected the word. Shadows do not protect. When I was close enough to see the stitching on his pack, the hiker spoke. Not words. A sound. A breath drawn in sharply, then released. It carried no panic, no urgency. It sounded like relief. The shadow did not move. I stopped where I was. The distance between us felt charged, unstable. I had the sudden irrational certainty that if I crossed an invisible boundary, something irreversible would occur, that the rules, whatever they still were, would change. Behind me, a radio squawked briefly, then fell silent. I did not turn to look. The hiker took another step. His shadow did not follow. For a moment, they were separated. That was when I understood that the thing I had been watching was not failing to imitate him. It was deciding when it no longer needed to. The separation did not last long, but it lasted long enough to be remembered. The hiker's foot came down. Weight transferred. The shadow remained where it was, stretched thin, as if reluctant to move, or as if it were anchored to something beneath the ground. Then, with a smoothness that made my stomach turn, it slid forward and reattached itself at his feet. No snap, no ripple, just alignment. The forest breathed again after that. A breeze stirred the upper branches. Leaves shifted. The creek's murmur returned, faint but present. The sudden normalcy felt artificial, like a stage set being hurriedly restored after a mistake. I heard one of my team exhale sharply behind me, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath without realizing it. I became aware that my jaw ached. I forced it to unclench. "This is search and rescue," I said, my voice steady by habit alone. "We're here to help you." The words felt worn, ceremonial. I had said them hundreds of times before, to people in pain, in shock, in grief. This time, they hung in the air without landing. The hiker did not turn. He did not acknowledge me. He took another step forward, deeper into the trees, away from the clearing. His pace was unchanged. Not hurried, not hesitant. I looked back at my team. Their faces were pale, expressions tight with the effort of understanding what they were seeing, without allowing themselves to truly see it. No one suggested retreat. No one suggested anything. They waited for me. That weight settled heavily on my shoulders. Authority is a strange thing. It persists even when it should not. I made the decision to follow. We moved after him in silence, the clearing slipping away behind us. The forest closed in quickly, branches knitting together overhead, reducing the last of the sky to thin, uneven strips. Our headlamps remained off. I did not consciously decide that. It simply felt wrong to introduce artificial light. The dim, uncertain illumination that filtered through the canopy seemed fragile, easily disturbed. As we followed, I began to notice inconsistencies in our spacing. The person ahead of me appeared farther away than they should have been, their outlines slightly blurred, as if viewed through heat shimmer. When I tried to close the distance, it remained the same. When I slowed, it did not increase. I checked behind me. The person there seemed too close, their presence pressing in. I sped up instinctively, then slowed again, unable to find a comfortable rhythm. The hiker remained ahead of us, always just far enough to require effort to keep him in sight. He did not stumble. He did not look back. He moved through the forest as if the terrain were flatter than it was, as if roots and rocks adjusted themselves for his steps. I began to realize that we were no longer gaining or losing elevation in a way I could track. The slope felt inconsistent beneath my boots. Sometimes we descended sharply, legs burning, only to find ourselves level moments later. My internal sense of direction, honed over years, faltered. I stopped to check the compass again. The needle spun slowly, lazily, then settled. I turned in place. It followed me, maintaining its orientation relative to my movement, not the land. When I stopped, it corrected itself. Not real. Real. Not real. I closed the compass and put it away. The radio crackled at my shoulder. A voice came through, distorted, stretched. It took me a moment to recognize it as the dispatcher. She asked for a status update. Her tone was unchanged. Calm. Professional. I answered, giving our last known coordinates. As I spoke, I realized I could not picture those numbers in my head anymore. They existed only as sounds. When she repeated them back, they sounded slightly different. The cadence off, as if she were reading from a different list. Copy, she said. Stand by. The radio went quiet again. Time passed, or something like it did. My watch showed progress, but it felt disconnected from what my body experienced. Fatigue came in waves that did not correspond to exertion. I would feel suddenly exhausted, breath shallow, then moments later alert again, muscles loose, as if nothing had happened. The hiker slowed. He came to a stop near a cluster of trees that grew too close together, their trunks twisting around each other in a way that suggested age beyond reason. The ground here was bare, stripped of undergrowth, dark soil exposed. The air felt heavier. The hiker stood still. His shadow pooled beneath him, darker than before, its edges crisp despite the low light. I stepped forward again, closing the distance carefully. Each footfall felt deliberate, chosen. I was acutely aware of my own shadow now, aware of it in a way that bordered on obsession. I could feel it at my back, a pressure, as if it were leaning against me. I stopped just short of the hiker. Up close, he smelled wrong, not rotten, not chemical, just absent, like air that has been filtered too many times. I realized then that I could not hear him breathing anymore. Hiker, I said again, softer this time. Can you hear me? He tilted his head slightly. The movement was slow, almost thoughtful. His shoulders rose and fell once, a gesture that mimicked a breath without fully committing to it. The shadow did not mimic this. It remained still, dense and heavy, as if it had weight of its own. One of my team shifted behind me. The sound of a boot scraping against soil felt too loud, intrusive. The hiker's head turned a fraction more, still not enough to reveal his face. Then he spoke. I did everything right, he said. The voice was calm, flat. It did not sound strained or afraid. It sounded like someone reciting a conclusion they had reached long ago. I felt a chill run through me. Lost hikers do not speak like that. They plead. They explain. They apologize. They do not justify themselves to the forest. What do you mean? I asked. I stayed on the trail, he said. I watched the light. I knew when to turn back. As he spoke, the shadow shifted subtly. Not in response to his movements, but in anticipation of them. It adjusted itself a heartbeat before he finished each sentence, as if it knew what was coming. You're safe now, I said, though the words tasted false. We can get you out of here. The hiker was silent for a long moment. The forest seemed to lean in again, attentive. Then he said, I already did. The shadow moved. It stretched outward, thinning, reaching across the bare ground toward me. The hiker remained still, but the shadow advanced, its edge creeping closer, deforming as it crossed uneven soil without breaking. I took an involuntary step back. Behind me, someone whispered my name. I did not turn. I stared at the shadow as it reached the toe of my boot and paused, as if considering. In that moment, I understood something without knowing how I knew it. This was not the first time it had done this, and we were not the first to follow. The shadow touched my boot, and nothing happened. No shock, no sensation of cold or pressure, just contact, or the idea of it. I stared down, unable to stop myself this time. The edge of the shadow rested against the leather, its outline crisp, confident. It did not bleed across me. It did not climb. It simply existed there, as if marking a boundary. I became acutely aware of my own shadow again. It lay behind me, stretched long by the failing light, thinner than I remembered it being. For a moment, I could not tell where it ended, and where the darkness of the forest floor began. I stepped back another pace. The shadow withdrew immediately, sliding back toward the hiker with a smooth, practiced motion. The hiker himself did not react. He did not look at me. He did not acknowledge the exchange at all. "It's getting dark," someone said behind me. The words were obvious, unnecessary. A plea disguised as an observation. I nodded, though no one could see it. My thoughts felt layered now, stacked slightly out of alignment. Each decision took effort, as if I were choosing from a list written in a language I used to know fluently, but hadn't spoken in years. "We'll bivouac if we have to," I said. "But we're not leaving him." The statement felt important, declarative. It anchored me to something familiar. Rescue doctrine. No one argued. The hiker finally turned, not all the way. Just enough that I could see part of his face. One eye, the line of his cheek, skin pale in the low light. His expression was neutral, almost polite. There was no fear there. No relief. No confusion. His eye did not focus on me. It drifted slightly to the side, as if he were looking past me, at something just over my shoulder. I resisted the urge to turn and see what held his attention. "You shouldn't stand there," he said. "Why?" I asked. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's where it notices you." My throat tightened. "What notices you?" He did not answer. His gaze returned to the trees ahead, and he stepped forward again, moving away from the cluster of twisted trunks, deeper into the forest. The shadow followed him perfectly now. No lag, no hesitation. If I hadn't seen it misbehave before, I would have found nothing wrong with it at all. That realization settled heavily in my chest. We followed again, because there was nothing else to do. Turning back felt unthinkable, not because it was impossible, but because it felt irrelevant, like trying to leave a conversation that had already ended. Night arrived, without ceremony. One moment there was enough light to make out shapes and contours. The next, there wasn't. The transition felt abrupt, like a door closing. We turned on our headlamps reluctantly, thin cones of white cutting through the darkness. Shadows leapt and shifted at the edges of the beams. Too many of them. They overlapped in ways that made it difficult to tell which belonged to which body. I focused on my footing, on the sound of my own breath, on the discipline of movement. The hiker remained just ahead of our light, always at the boundary where illumination failed. His silhouette appeared and vanished between steps, as if the darkness itself were cooperating with him. I checked behind me again. For a brief, terrifying moment, I counted one fewer person than there should have been. I stopped, heart hammering, and swept my light back. The missing team member stood just outside the beam, perfectly still. When the light touched him, he blinked, confused. "You stopped," he said, as if explaining something to himself. "How long were you there?" I asked. He frowned. "I don't know. I thought you were right in front of me." The distance between us had changed without my noticing. The space felt elastic now, stretching and compressing without warning. I ordered everyone to tighten formation. They did, but the sense of separation persisted. An invisible tension pulling us slightly apart no matter how close we tried to stay. The forest began to repeat itself. That was the only way I could describe it. We passed the same fallen log twice, then 3 times. A distinctive boulder appeared ahead, then behind us. The twisted trees reappeared off to the side, their shapes unmistakable. Each time the hiker moved past them without comment, without slowing, as if he expected them to be there again. "Are we going in circles?" someone asked. "No," I said automatically. "We're not." I checked the compass again despite myself. The needle pointed steadily north. Too steadily. It did not waver when I moved. It did not respond to the land. I put it away and did not take it out again. The hiker stopped near a shallow depression in the ground, a place where the earth dipped inward. Leaves and debris collected in a natural bowl. He stood at the edge of it, Looking down, the shadow pooled inside the depression, darker than the surrounding darkness, as if the ground itself were holding it. "This is where I waited," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For it to decide," he replied. The way he said it suggested that the decision had already been made. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave, to turn around and walk until my legs gave out, until the forest released me back to something recognizable. The urge was so strong it bordered on panic. At the same time, another feeling rose beneath it, a pull, a sense of inevitability, as if part of me had already stepped into that depression and was simply waiting for the rest to catch up. Not real. Real. Not real. The hiker turned toward me fully now. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. There was nothing wrong with it. That was the most disturbing part. No distortion. No emptiness. No sign of injury or madness. He looked like a man who had slept poorly but otherwise intact. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I felt seen in a way that stripped something away. "You'll understand soon," he said. Behind him, the shadow stirred. It rose slightly from the depression, not lifting off the ground but thickening, gaining definition. It spread wider than it should have, its edges brushing against the leaves without disturbing them. I took a step back without realizing I had decided to. The ground did not feel the same beneath my feet anymore. It felt thinner, less reliable. "This is where I stop," the hiker said. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, anything that would reassert control, but the words did not come. The shadow moved again. Not toward me, toward my own. I did not feel the moment when the shadows touched. I expected something tactile. Cold, maybe. Pressure. Some sign that contact had occurred. Instead, there was only a shift in attention, like realizing a sound has stopped, and you don't know when it happened. One moment I was aware of my shadow as something behind me, an extension, obedient. The next, that certainty was gone. The hiker stood very still. His expression had softened, as if something he had been carrying for a long time had finally been set down. The shadow behind him no longer behaved like a shadow at all. It no longer mirrored. It no longer waited. It leaned. Not forward, not back. Sideways. Toward me. The forest seemed to dim around the edges of my vision, not darkening so much as narrowing. My awareness tunneled inward. Sounds became distant, muffled, as if heard through water. I could see my team behind me, their headlamps cutting erratic shapes through the trees. But they felt far away, separated by more than distance. "Don't," someone said. I don't know who. I tried to step back again. My foot moved, but the sensation of movement arrived late, disconnected from intention. The ground felt wrong beneath me, its resistance delayed, like walking on packed snow that gives way a fraction of a second too late. The hiker watched me with something like sympathy. "It's easier if you don't fight it," he said. "That's what I did wrong at first." "What is it?" I asked. Even as the question left my mouth, I knew it was useless. Names would not help. Explanations would not apply. He considered me for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "I don't know," he said. "I only know what it wants." The shadow at his feet shifted again, expanding, its outline no longer constrained by the shape of his body. It reached toward my own shadow, which I could no longer feel as something attached to me. The two dark shapes overlapped, merged, separated, their edges blurring and reforming. I felt a sudden, intense pressure behind my eyes, as if something were being pulled forward through my skull. Memories surfaced unbidden, not in sequence, not coherently. Snatches of past searches, faces of people found too late, names I had spoken into radios, into phones, into silence. With each memory came a subtle distortion, Details softened. Timelines shifted. I could see moments where I had turned someone away from danger, and moments where I had led them closer without knowing it. The line between the two blurred. Not real. Real. Not real. I dropped to one knee without deciding to. My hands pressed into the soil, grounding me in something solid, something that still felt the way it should. The earth was cold and damp, real in a way nothing else was anymore. Get back, I tried to say. The words came out wrong, thinner, less certain. One of my team stepped forward despite my earlier orders. His light swept across me, across the hiker, across the depression in the ground. When the beam passed over the shadows, it faltered, dimming for a fraction of a second before brightening again. He froze. "Something's wrong," he said. "Your shadow." I did not want to hear that sentence. I had been avoiding it, skirting around it, hoping that as long as no one else acknowledged it, it would remain manageable. I looked down. My shadow did not align with my body. It lay slightly to the side, angled away from where the light dictated it should be. When I lifted my hand, the shadow followed, but not immediately. There was a hesitation, a pause that stretched just long enough to be unmistakable. The hiker nodded, as if confirming a hypothesis. "That's how it starts," he said. "At first, it's just late. Then it gets curious." The shadow beneath him began to thin, its edges dissolving into the surrounding darkness. It no longer needed his shape. It no longer needed him. "You can still leave," he said, and for the first time, there was something like urgency in his voice. "You just have to accept what that means." "What does it mean?" I asked. He looked past me again, at my team, at the forest, at the narrowing corridor of light and dark that had become our world. "It means you won't be the one who goes home," he said. The words landed heavily, not because they were frightening, but because they felt already decided. I understood then that he was not warning me. He was explaining. The pressure behind my eyes intensified. For a moment I could not remember why I had come here, why any of this mattered. The forest felt familiar in a way that frightened me, as if I had been here longer than I could account for. I heard my name again, shouted this time. I tried to turn toward the sound, but my body responded sluggishly, as if waiting for permission. The shadow moved decisively. It slid fully into alignment with me, overlapping my own shadow until I could no longer distinguish one from the other. The sensation was not physical. It was conceptual, like a line being redrawn. The hiker exhaled, long and slow. "That's it," he said. "It's chosen." I felt something slip, something I had never realized I was holding on to. A sense of position, of being anchored to a single point of view. The world tilted, not visually, but internally. For a moment I saw myself from the outside. I saw a man kneeling in the dirt, head bowed, shoulders tense. I saw his team clustered behind him, lights shaking, fear beginning to override training. I saw the forest pressing in, patient. And I saw the shadow at his feet, perfectly behaved at last. When the world settled again, it did so imperfectly. I was standing. I do not remember rising. My knees no longer pressed into the soil. My hands were clean. The cold dampness I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by a distant awareness of temperature, as if my body were reporting conditions from another room. The hiker was gone. There was no sound of departure, no movement through brush, no retreating footsteps. One moment he had been there, watching with that tired, almost kind expression, and the next there was only the depression in the ground where the shadow had pooled. Leaves lay undisturbed. The soil bore no new marks. My team stared at me. Their lights converged, overlapping beams washing over my face, my chest, my boots. I recognized the look in their eyes. The moment when concern tips into assessment, when they stop seeing a leader and start seeing a variable. Are you okay? Someone asked. The question sounded distant, distorted by a subtle delay, like an echo arriving too late to be useful. I opened my mouth to answer and felt the muscles respond correctly, but the intention behind the movement felt vague, secondary. I'm fine, I said. The words came out with the right tone. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. That frightened me more than if I had sounded shaken. One of them crouched slightly, angling his light toward the ground at my feet. I knew what he was looking for before he said anything. Your shadow, he said slowly. It's strange. I followed his gaze downward. My shadow lay where it should. It stretched away from me in the direction dictated by the lights, its edges crisp, its shape correct. When I lifted my hand, it followed immediately. No lag. No hesitation. Perfect obedience. There's nothing wrong with it, I said. Even as I spoke, a contradiction pressed against the inside of my skull. The certainty I felt did not come from observation. It came from agreement. From alignment. The man frowned. He looked again, then shook his head slightly, as if dismissing a trick of the light. Must have been the angle, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We stood there longer than made sense. The forest quiet around us. The depression in the ground now, just another feature among many. Whatever tension had been building dissipated without release, leaving behind only exhaustion and confusion. We should move, I said. Get out before it's fully dark. It already is, someone replied. I looked up at the canopy. The darkness above felt different now. Less oppressive, more accommodating. The beams of our headlamps cut cleanly through it, no longer faltering. We began the hike back without discussion. The forest did not repeat itself this time. Landmarks appeared where they should. The fallen log we had passed before lay where memory said it would. The twisted trees were gone, replaced by ordinary trunks spaced in ordinary ways. The trail re-emerged beneath our boots with a suddenness that felt staged. No one spoke about the hiker. No one asked where he had gone, or how he had vanished, or why we were turning back without him. The omission settled over us like an unspoken agreement. When someone did open their mouth, it was only to relay distances, check bearings, confirm pace. I checked my watch. It was working. The second hand moved smoothly, its rhythm comforting. I noted the time and realized with a jolt that far more had passed than I could account for. Hours where there should have been less than one. I mentioned this quietly to no one. As we descended, I became aware of a subtle shift in how the forest responded to me. Branches no longer snagged my pack. Roots seemed to present themselves before my boots found them. The terrain felt anticipatory, as if adjusting slightly ahead of my movement. It was not dramatic, it was efficient. I told myself this was relief, the easing of tension after a difficult operation, the mind's way of smoothing rough edges. Not real. Real. Not real. At the trailhead, the lights of the staging area glowed warmly. Vehicles sat where we had left them. Equipment lay undisturbed. The world felt intact again, almost aggressively normal. The dispatcher met us with questions. I answered them automatically. Hiker not located. Search suspended due to conditions. Resume at first light. The words slid into place without resistance. She asked if anyone needed medical attention. No, I said. She asked if I was sure. Yes. My team avoided my eyes. That night, alone in my truck, I noticed that my reflection in the windshield did not align perfectly when I shifted my head. The movement lagged, just slightly, then corrected itself. I stared until my eyes burned, until exhaustion claimed the moment and turned it into something less certain. In the days that followed, the paperwork went through as it always did. Statements were taken, timelines constructed. The hiker's name was added to a list that already contained too many others. Search areas were mapped, probabilities calculated. I wrote my report carefully. I did not mention the shadow. When I read it back, it felt complete. Too complete. Details I did not remember typing appeared on the page. Explanations that smoothed over gaps I knew existed. The report resolved itself in ways that made everyone comfortable, including me. That was when I began to worry. Small things started to happen. Inconsistencies that did not announce themselves. I would reach for my coffee mug and find it already in my hand. I would turn a corner in my house and arrive there before deciding to. Mirrors felt less reliable. Reflections arriving with a confidence that suggested rehearsal rather than response. People began to tell me I looked rested. I slept without dreaming. When I walked outside at dusk, I found myself avoiding looking down. Once I caught my shadow stepping forward a fraction of a second before I did. It corrected itself immediately. I laughed it off. I told myself stories. I told myself I had been under stress, that the forest had played tricks on me. That experience leaves marks even when nothing is wrong. Not real. Real. Not real. The call logs show that I led 3 more searches after that one. I remember them, vaguely. Names blur. Outcomes blend together. Found alive. Found late. Suspended. The usual categories. But there are gaps. Hours unaccounted for. Conversations I don't recall having. Documented by others. Decisions attributed to me that feel logical but unfamiliar. Like advice given by someone who knows my habits well but does not share my memories. The final incident was minor. A hiker approached me at a trailhead, early morning, fog still lifting. He looked at me for a long time without speaking. When I asked if he needed help, he shook his head. "I've seen you before," he said. I smiled politely. "A lot of people have." He frowned. "No," he said. "I mean, out there. Yesterday, just before dark." I asked him where. He gestured vaguely toward the trees. "You were walking with someone," he said. "Or something." I felt a familiar pressure behind my eyes. "What did it look like?" I asked. He hesitated. "I couldn't tell," he said. "Your shadow was in the way. That was the last search I led. They told me it was administrative. Budget. Liability. A chance to rest." I did not argue. Now I record this instead. Because when I stand in low light, when the world thins and the rules soften, I feel a pull toward the forest that does not feel like fear. It feels like recognition. I don't know how long I've been recording. The file timestamps don't agree with the clock on the wall, and the clock on the wall has started losing minutes the way tired people lose names. I reset it every morning. By afternoon, it's wrong again. Always ahead. Never behind. That feels important. I moved out of the house last week. Or maybe it was longer ago. The neighbors started asking questions I didn't like the sound of. Not accusations. Observations. They said they saw me outside at night, standing under the streetlight at the end of the block, not moving. They said I stayed there longer than made sense, that the light flickered when I stood beneath it. I don't remember doing that. But I remember the streetlight. I remember how clean my shadow looked there. How precise. I've taken to driving instead. Long drives. Forest roads mostly. I tell myself it's habit. Muscle memory from years of search routes and access points. The Cascades are full of these roads. Half-forgotten spines that lead nowhere in particular. They don't ask questions. They don't require explanations. Sometimes I park and just sit with the engine off, listening to the cooling metal tick and settle. The silence out there is different from the silence in town. It isn't empty. It waits. I don't get out of the car anymore. Not after what happened 2 nights ago. I had pulled off near an old trailhead, one that hasn't been maintained in years. The sign was still there, sun-bleached and cracked, the lettering familiar enough that my eyes filled in what was missing. I didn't remember deciding to stop. I only realized I had when the engine was already quiet. The light was wrong. Not dramatically. just enough to register as an error. Dusk stretched too long, the sky holding on to color past its allotted time. The forest edge seemed closer than it should have been, the trees pressing toward the road in a way that made the space feel narrower. I checked my mirrors. My reflection looked back at me without delay. That reassured me, more than it should have. I looked down at the ground beside the car. My shadow lay there, dark and well-defined, cast by the dying light. It touched the gravel at my feet and extended toward the tree line. It did not move when I shifted in my seat. I told myself that was normal. Shadows don't move unless you do. I opened the door. The shadow moved first. Just a fraction. Just enough. I stayed in the car. Not real. Real. Not real. I don't know how long I watched it after that. Time behaves strangely when you stop insisting on it. Eventually, the light faded enough that the shadow dissolved into general darkness, indistinguishable from everything else. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Since then, I've noticed other things. Small permissions being taken without my input. I'll think about turning left and find myself already going that way. I'll reach for an object and feel the intention arrive after the action. It's subtle, efficient. If I weren't looking for it, I might even appreciate it. That thought frightens me more than anything else. I went back through old case files yesterday. Physical copies. I don't trust digital records anymore. Too easy for things to adjust themselves. I wanted something fixed. Something that couldn't change unless touched. Some of the files felt thinner than they should have been. Reports I remembered writing in detail had been reduced to summaries. Names were missing. Dates blurred together. In several cases, the final outcome had been amended from unresolved to suspended, as if someone had grown tired of waiting for answers. In the margins of one file, in my own handwriting, there was a note I do not remember writing. It said, "Shadow confirmed cooperative." I stared at that sentence for a long time. The word cooperative felt wrong, too optimistic, too generous, but it was written in the same shorthand I used for equipment checks and terrain notes. Casual, unconcerned, as if the conclusion had been reassuring. Last night, while reviewing that file, the power went out. No storm, no warning, just darkness, sudden and complete. The house filled with it quickly, corners dissolving, familiar shapes losing their authority. I sat very still at my desk, hands flat on the paper, breathing slowly. When the emergency light kicked on, it cast a dim glow across the room. My shadow stood against the wall. It was sharper than it should have been, the edges too clean for such weak light. It did not waver when the bulb flickered. I raised my hand. It followed, immediately, perfectly. That was the problem. I waited for the hesitation, the delay, the small human error I had grown used to noticing. It didn't come. The shadow behaved exactly as it should have, without correction, without thought. I felt a wave of disappointment so strong it left me dizzy. I don't know when I started expecting otherwise. I stood there for a long time, testing small movements. A shift of weight, a tilt of the head. The shadow mirrored me with absolute fidelity. It did not lead. It did not lag. It did not need to. That was when I understood what the hiker had meant. You won't be the one who goes home. At the time, I thought he meant death. Disappearance, becoming another name on a list, another empty space marked by coordinates and probability curves. I thought he meant leaving the world entirely. Now I think he meant something else. I think he meant that someone always comes back, just not always the right one. This morning, I found mud on my boots. I live nowhere near mud. The tread pattern matched the soil near that depression in the forest, the shallow bowl where the shadow had pooled. I recognized it instantly. That familiarity felt intimate, invasive, like remembering a place you don't recall visiting. There was a leaf caught in the laces. I don't know how it got there. I haven't driven since the night at the trailhead. The keys are still on the hook where I left them. The car hasn't moved. I checked. The mud is still wet. I am writing this now because the feeling is getting stronger. The pull. The sense that there is somewhere I am supposed to be. Something unfinished that requires my presence. Not urgently. Patiently. Like a task that has been waiting a long time and does not mind waiting a little longer. I keep thinking about the people who reported seeing me on the trail at dusk. Walking calmly. Not alone. I want to tell you that I'm still myself. That I can feel the difference. That I would know if something had taken my place. But certainty has become difficult. I can tell you that my shadow looks right today. I can tell you that it behaves. I can tell you that when I stand near the trees, near the edge of places where light gives up, I feel a sense of alignment that is almost peaceful. I can tell you that I haven't finished this recording because I keep hearing movement behind me, just out of rhythm with my own. If someone finds this, listen carefully. Not to the words, to the spaces between them. Because if you ever see me out there, on a trail you don't remember starting down, and you think something about me looks familiar but not quite right, don't call out. Don't follow. And whatever you do,